guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Neighbor Repeatedly Trespassed on My Property at Night to Deal Drugs. I live in a pretty rural area, along with my husband. We had just moved in right before the neighbors next to us moved out. The mother had seemed like a nice lady, and even asked my husband to keep an eye out on the house while it was up for sale. We never did know why she moved out, but it seemed like the house was important to her, nonetheless. Her son also lived with her before they moved out. And he always seemed a little off. Well, we found out he was even more off when we found him coming to this secluded spot behind our house every night to deal drugs. Let me explain. We live in a pretty quiet area, and behind our house is a water tank facility and land that is owned by housing developers. Nothing has been built on this property besides the water facility. At night, this area is very dark, and unless someone or something is making noise, you would not even be able to tell someone was out there. Well, one night my wife heard some strange noises near the back of our house, sort of in between us and the old neighbor's house. I went to go check, and it was some guy throwing away trash in the old neighbor's trash bin. I did not really think much of it at first. Like I said, we live in a pretty secluded area and the area behind us with the water facility is pretty dark, so I would figure eventually some kids would come up here to party or something. But once we were able to get a good look at this someone, we realized that it was the son from next door. We also quickly realized that he was not partying or just visiting his mom's house, he was dealing drugs. His nightly visits turned into him coming behind our house multiple times a night, and each time he would be there for about 15 minutes. One night we discreetly looked out the window and saw what appeared to be a drug deal taking place. We called the police officers and they had said they were going to send somebody out, but they never did. I understand that technically he was not on our property, but just the thought of him being there at night, making drug deals and God knows what else, made my husband and I uncomfortable. The police were not going to be much help, they did not have a good reputation in our town anyways, and we did not feel comfortable approaching this guy directly. It became noticeably clear that he was not mentally all there. We would hear him talking to himself at night. Sometimes he would be punching the air or dancing, I was not really sure. And I was not trying to find out. We decided to wait a couple of days and purchase some, no trespassing, and, private property, signs. We did not want to be too direct with him, so we had hoped that by waiting a couple of days this would not seem too aggressive. We posted the signs but much to our dismay, he ignored them and continued visiting the spot behind our house every night, multiple times a night most nights. In one particular night, we heard him pull up and park his car. Just a few moments later, we heard a lot of noise and ruckus coming from him and his car. When we tried to listen, he was singing to himself and punching the air, playing air guitar. Which, hey, rock on man. But not while you are clearly high on something and behind my house. So, we tried calling the police once more and they had told us again that they were sending someone out to investigate. We figured they were not again, because about 25 minutes had gone by and they still had not shown up. I was afraid that if they did show up, that the guy would be gone already, and we would not have any proof. This made me think of installing security cameras. Well, just as the guy was about to leave, it seemed like he was waiting for his drug dealer or something, the police officers pulled up and busted him. We had finally come out of the house and faced him, feeling safe that the police officers were there if anything were to happen. They had handcuffed the man and began searching his car, and found various drug paraphernalia and even a gun, which shocked us to the core. We figured something was not right with him, but we did not think he would have a weapon on him or anything. This made us even more glad that the police officers had caught him. Although he had never done anything violent towards us or even acknowledged us, who knows what he would have done with that gun. It also turns out that he had just recently gotten out of jail and was on parole. But, because he was in possession of drug paraphernalia, he violated his parole. He ended up going back to jail, and while I truly hope he gets the help he needs, I was glad I did not have to worry about someone perching behind my house anymore. The next story is titled, Mock the Disabled? Justice is served many years later. This is a story about a piece of crap receiving their deserved karma several years later. Many years ago, I worked in the lovely career of retail. It's sadly normal for there to be a constant flow of shop scum that make you despise their existence, and there are those that are so horrific that what they do is burned into your mind forever. Fortunately, one of these unforgettable moments allowed me to extract my revenge. I had only worked in retail for 1 year in this newly built store and was starting to settle in. Getting to know the great customers and understanding that some people shouldn't be allowed outside, which being a shy person who hates conflict wasn't the best, but at least one of my customers was an absolutely adorable elderly lady who always made time to talk and was an absolute joy to be with. It had been some weeks since I had last seen her, but one morning, I see her car park into the disabled parking bay, as she already has a blue badge. Only this time she hobbled out of the car on crutches with a pot on her leg. I didn't have chance to talk to her yet when a works truck, which did not have a blue disabled badge, pulled into the disabled space next to her, and out jumped an early 40s builder with their teenage kid. Well, this little old lady was having none of this and must have absolutely massive balls of steel, and stood up to this ignorant builder and politely informed them that they shouldn't be parking there as it's for the disabled and he doesn't have a badge. What happened next, I can't forget. This builder decided the best course of action was to humiliate and insult this poor elderly lady in crutches, accuse her of faking her disability, and claim the cast on her leg was a fake and that she probably milks the benefit system for as much money as possible, then walks off putting on an overdramatic fake limp, laughing away with their teenage kid whilst the old lady stood there in shock. Sadly, being one who lacks courage, I did absolutely nothing about it, and that would stick with me forever. I tried feebly to ask a manager later to do something about it, but they didn't care or want to get involved. For years, I worked in this store, always seeing this scum builder come in and out. Fortunately, I never interacted with this scum builder, but I saw them often, and every time I did, I would always remember what they had done vividly. I would still see them park in the disabled bays, and even got to the point where I would recognize them by the large blue Mercedes they drove. 7 years later, I was still working in this store, and this scum was still parking in disabled and looking like an absolute cunt. Yet this year I was blessed with good fortune, and our store was outfitted with some absolute joyful equipment. Due to the high number of complaints, our store had set up a company to deal with the parking violations, but instead of having external parties coming in and ticketing cars, the staff of the store were given the ticketing machine, and it was our duty to go to the car park and record any cars that violated the parking rules. This was all done digitally, and there would be no paper tickets upon the cars. This was brilliant. As soon as I found out, I knew what I was going to do. It didn't take long for me to learn how to use the machine, and it certainly didn't take long for the opportunity to get revenge, and so it began. There were 3 rules for parking, and if you break these rules, there is a lovely £80 fine in return each time it happened. The first rule: no parking in disabled without a badge. And I know well that the scum builder is certainly violating this rule, and it wasn't long until I saw him next, and as soon as he entered the store, I quickly scurried out with the ticketing machine, and lo and behold, there was the oversized blue Mercedes in the closest disabled bay, with no badge. I smashed them car details in with some well-shot photos and sent the report off so that they would receive a lovely letter of their fine they would ask to pay. That's not enough though, but fortunately it takes weeks for them to finally receive the ticket, which grants me the opportunity to constantly ticket their parking violations. Because as you would expect, the scum would always park in disabled, and as I worked at the front of the store, I would always know when they had parked. After ticketing their car dozens of times, the scum unfortunately learnt their lesson, as their oversized blue Mercedes no longer appeared in disabled parking bays. But as you expect, the scum would still be scum, and they would find their new parking space inside child parking. Rule 2: don't park inside child parking without a child. Had this scum gotten enough, I thought? Of course not. They haven't learnt their lesson and continue to be a complete wanker and park in the child parking, which we didn't have many spaces for. At this point, I knew all their car details by heart and would gleefully fill out the ticket machine as I skipped over to their car violating the child parking and take the photos needed for them, including shots of their cat seats that bear no child seats in them. And as it became routine, this once again carried on a few weeks more of tickets being created, and eventually they start receiving the fines. Fortunately, me being me, I am completely invisible to others and often looked over, and I have yet to be seen or caught. But as all good things must eventually come to an end, when the scum came into the shop, their blue turd automobile was no longer there in child parking or disabled. Has the scum finally learnt their lesson? Would you be surprised if they had not? as it didn't take me long to find them. Rule 3, you must park inside a marked bay. And what a surprise, the scum still manages to suck this up. They would park over the line, taking 2 spaces up. Well, guess what? That's a job for me and my ticket machine. Trying to park inside taxi parking but can't fit the big ass car in it? Boom, that ain't inside a marked bay, and ka-ching, another ticket and fine for the have one single wheel slightly over the white line of a bay? Well, guess who technically broke the rule? That's right, scumbag did. And there goes a few more weeks of fun, until eventually scumbag runs out of ways that they can possibly break the rules and our company hires externally to start ticketing cars. So my beloved weapon of justice goes to rest. Now I know what people are probably going to say, that all these fines are not enforceable because of blah blah blah, but I honestly don't care for a few reasons. Firstly, I'm being paid to do this, so either way my time or money isn't wasted. Secondly, it did have an effect as they repeatable change their parking habits. And thirdly, even if they don't end up paying, they are still going to spend a fuck ton of the time and effort trying to overturn them over and over again, having to constantly be harassed by mail. Overall, if all the fines are counted separate and added up, they would have received thousands of pounds worth of fines, building up overtime for being scum. Cherry on the top, about 3 years later I walk by this piece of scum on the car park and watch as they scream at some innocent dude in a high-vis jacket, accusing them for being the one giving them all parking fines. Which put me at peace, knowing this must have seriously got to them and cost them to still be raving mad after 3 years. Short version. I give someone many small parking fines adding up to the thousands of pounds for insulting a disabled lady several years earlier. The next story is titled, A Good HOA Story, Say It Isn't So. TL, Dr. HOA granted a temporary reasonable accommodation to break the rules for about 4 months due to a recent surgery on husband and my chronic health condition. Miracles will never cease. My husband and I bought a home 25 years ago that had an HOA. For the most part, they're not particularly nitpicky, but they do have an issue with trash cans in plain view. Well, a couple of months ago my husband had back surgery because his spinal column was constricting his spinal cord, making it difficult to walk. He'd suffered for nearly 3 months before he finally got a diagnosis of spinal stenosis and had undergo emergency surgery, 4 days from diagnosis to surgery. Now, I should mention that my husband is 72 and I'm 66 and I have severe rheumatoid arthritis. I've been diagnosed for over 20 years. My condition makes it difficult for me to perform strenuous activities. So, we got a first notice letter for our trash cans being in the driveway. This happened while the husband was still in the hospital. I was going back and forth to the hospital, so it was a couple of weeks before I retrieved the letter from our community mailbox. A week after my husband had been released from the hospital, we get the second notice. Mind you, for the week in between I had hauled the cab into the backyard and injured my left shoulder, elbow and my right elbow and wrist. So, I decided to try to get a reasonable accommodation for the cans from the HOA. I wrote the management company explaining our situation and that my husband was reviving very slowly, still in a back brace and using a walker at the time, while I had a chronic condition that impeded my ability to take the cans out to the curb on the appropriate days. I also explained that once my husband began physical therapy, his recovery should improve, but the minimum time he'd be in PT was 12 weeks. Well, hush my puppies, as my grandma used to say, God rest her precious soul. The HOA granted us the temporary reasonable accommodation. I'm still kind of in shock, but it goes to show not all HOA boards are evil. The last story is titled, Obnoxious Perimeter Fence. Our HOA has 3 phases. Ours is the oldest and has the least amount of common property. HOA built a perimeter fence that borders a drainage ditch that backs up to the school in our phase. A couple years ago the HOA raised fees and justified it to include lawn maintenance on the strip behind the fence. Lawn company barely mowed it, had to complain regularly, but it at least got mowed occasionally. Later developer sold all the houses and HOA transferred to community that year. Newly elected resident BOD, conveniently a majority from the other phases, mentioned they would try to find a better lawn company. Next year's annual meeting rolls around, and BOD announces the plats actually extend out to the drainage ditch and it isn't common property, so there's no plan to maintain it. It's up to individual owners. Cherry on top is the fees stayed the same. Problem is I either have to carry my equipment to the front entrance of the phase and wrap back around a half-mile to trespass what's now private property to get to the strip, go over the HOA-built fence with a ladder that I'm now informed is actually my fence, or go the shorter route down an 8-foot drop from a bridge and trespass other private property to get to it. Well, everyone's sore about it on this road. The informal policy last year seemed to be don't ask don't tell, and the drainage ditch was left to grow wild. Obnoxious for weed maintenance as seeds blow into my lawn, but so is life. Welp, it's midsummer this year, weeds are nice and tall. HOA's been dropping the ball on a lot of our maintenance for this phase on the stuff our fees are supposed to cover while our money goes to maintaining their phases, and I suspect as retaliation for the social media complaining they decided to have the management company send out enforcement letters en masse to everyone on the road. Pushed again. Still politely but thinking duck these pricks. They said developers may have entered private agreement to build the fence, but all their HOA documents they've inherited have no record of an easement for it. There's some language about maintaining the drainage easements in the CCRs, but not sure whether it covers drainage easements on our private property. Generally, just suck HOAs. Bad way for cocksuckers with god complexes to try and lord over their neighbors. Thanks for listening.